Data Storytellers. Today on the show, I have with me Sarah Bourgeois, and Sarah is the Analytics and Data Science Manager over at Toromont Cat. We met at CDAO. I was chairing the event, and it was a lot of fun, and Sarah really stood out. Genuinely, she had some really good insights and great energy as well, so I really had my eyes on actually doing an interview with her, which today becomes a reality. So first of all, Sarah, welcome on the show.
Thank you, Laszlo, for having me. I'm so excited to be here. I love your show.
Thank you very much. By the way, did I pronounce your last name right? I know because I'm from Europe. I'm European, so that's how we say that actual word. But you can correct me. Feel free, please.
I typically say bourgeois, but bourgeoisie makes sense because that is kind of the term. So, but bourgeois is how I pronounce it.
Oh, got it. Okay, no, fantastic. So I'm glad we clarified that. And Sarah, so we spoke actually even before the podcast because you're joining one of our masterclasses coming up. So we kind of dug into what you do over at Toromont Cat. Now, first of all, how did you get into the world of analytics? Before we dive into your role, that I would love to hear what really attracted you to this quickly expanding scene.
Awesome. I feel like my journey is very similar to many others in that it is scattered and full of unknown surprises. So I'm a deeply curious person. I have a tremendous love for people and problem solving. I actually went to school for civil engineering and quickly found my way into business. But then I fell in love. I fell in love with the intercept of data and people and business and how all of that might fit together. I didn't know what it looked like, but it felt like something special. I had an amazing mentor really early on. And because of his support, I was able to begin experimenting and building prototypes and strategies. And truthfully, I call this stage my fail hard and fail fast. I failed often in driving value, and I quickly learned what did and didn't work when it came to using data to help the business. So I spent a couple of years there asking questions and studying the business and learning a lot about data, skilling up in that area, and really talking to hundreds, thousands of people throughout the business organization I work in, as well as in industry. So I'm sure we'll discuss that later. So today, however, I identify as an innovation leader. I build and I manage cross-functional teams and I work with stakeholders at all levels of seniority throughout the business. My incredible team encompasses data scientists, analysts, data engineers, machine learning engineers, tech leads, students, and project managers. So we're a motley crew of driven people that all have a love for data and problem solving in common. So that's kind of my journey.
Well, I really look forward to diving into that. How do you manage and lead that motley crew? I think you shared some insights at CDAO about how you find the right people and all that stuff. So if we get there, maybe we can just dig into that a little bit. But before we explore your current role and then the challenges that you observe and your methods of engaging stakeholders and all that good stuff, Toromont Cat. So when I first encountered the company, I was like, okay, Caterpillar. I know Caterpillar. It's a heavy machinery, construction equipment, but Toromont, that I was less familiar. So maybe can you enlighten the audience about what Toromont does in case they are ignorant like me?
Absolutely. So yes, CAT, a lot of people know, big yellow equipment, giant words of CAT on the side of it. So that's the CAT equipment. However, Toromont is not Caterpillar. So Toromont itself, we participate in the industrial equipment market, where demand for highly specialized capital goods is followed by reoccurring revenue and profit through parts and service. These are markets where there's high barrier to entry, specifically where substantial capital and specialization is required with high quality brands like Caterpillar. Toromont also actually participates in low specialty markets, which complement those primary markets. So specifically, these markets include, these are just a few of them, power systems, construction, mining, material handling, and agriculture.
Got it. So you wouldn't necessarily think of a company like Toromont as being deeply data driven. So when you say Netflix, everyone kind of understands that the whole company was built on gathering user data and then providing a customer experience through leveraging that data. Now with Toromont, you started working there and you just kind of got introduced to the world of analytics. And we already talked about what attracted you in general, but what really captured your imagination in terms of the realities of the industry today? Like, what did you see as the greatest opportunities? What do you see as the greatest opportunities right now in data analytics that really get you excited?
Awesome. I'd actually like to tell a story to kind of set the stage for what I really started to witness reoccurring over and over in those early years before I started to build my teams. So this is an example, right? We're a B2B business, so this is a very B2B relevant situation. So hopefully some people listening can relate to this story.
This is the place to tell a story for sure.
This is a story, and it's inspired by some true events, but it's an amalgamation of a lot of events, so no particular situation in particular. So let's say there's a sales leadership team, and they want to reevaluate their sales coverage strategy. They have been assigning sales reps to customers for their whole careers and have had a lot of success. But they're passionate, they're driven. They want to see if there's a better way to do something. They've been hearing a lot of things about analytics and data science. So on a wind of hope, they approach the data team and they say, we need you to create a model that predicts how much potential revenue each customer represents each year. Yeah, that'll do it. Can you make that for us? Data team says, fair enough. And they go off and they spend many months and make many iterations and come up with a beautiful model. Just chef's kiss, great accuracy, pass it back. And they don't hear anything. Okay, so they assume a job well done. 2 months later, the leadership team approaches them again. Says, hey, thanks for that. That was awesome. We actually need another model that predicts whether a customer can grow in the next 5 years. The team says, okay, that's a little bit more complicated. Let's see if we can figure that out. They go about it. They come up with a somewhat successful model. They pass it back. Leadership team says, awesome. And they don't hear back. Now, let's talk about both sides of this equation. The data team at this point assumes they've done an awesome job. They worked hard. They provided a great model that the business requested. And now their leaders are more informed. What a great impact. Job well done. The reality is the sales leaders are completely stuck with the data insights. They are looking at them like, what have I done? They thought they would be able to work with it once they had it. They certainly thought they could ingest this data meaningfully. However, they have, let's say, 200,000 customers. And suddenly they have to realize that they need to marry historical data with these forecasts and growth predictions. And they need to somehow then translate all of that information to which accounts do I need to adjust, which reps are assigned. They thought they could just put some rules together. They thought they could just consider geography manually, maybe consider a rep capacity. Wait, oh no, what about the customers we don't know already? So now there's too many considerations and they're really overwhelmed. There's too many customers to sort through and they don't even know where to start. In fact, they're actually quite defeated. And they're even more convinced now than before that, you know what? Coverage is just nuanced. And it really requires a person like myself to manually do this every time. We gave it a shot. They did a great job. These smart people, they did a great job. But analytics and data science just muddy the waters here. But we paid a lot for this data, so let's use it to validate our business forecasts. Just like that, hope is squashed. And just like that, it's all over. Data insights that took months and sometimes years to develop are now minor, informative sources for reporting. Reporting that doesn't actually drive any decisions and just evaluate gut checks. So the actual decisions that impact the business are not being touched. So the value of optimizing coverage, optimizing the actual reps that are communicating with these businesses to drive revenue and profit and value, it's not being realized. So I hope the people listening to this call are like, this story sounds familiar. It's a story of both parties, the business and the data people, doing their absolute best. It's also very representative of a particular use case, which is the B2B world today. I think this meaningful gap, to your original question, is what most inspired me. This gap is intuition. So let me explain that a little bit, where I think the most opportunity is right now. B2B. There is a tremendous gap between the intuition a data practitioner has and the business. The most obvious is in traditional sector. So let me explain why. Our data people and our IT groups are not customers. This is not like the retail space where they have an intimate experience being on the other end of it. They have been a purchaser. They have used a shopper's app. They have experienced that world for what good looks like. So if they get requests that don't make sense, or they know what questions to ask, or if they get results, they have some lens with which to view that to say, is this valuable? Could I use this to make a decision? Or if I was the customer, would this make me buy? Would this make me push over the line? The issue is that a data scientist in my world does not have firsthand experience working in road construction or an undermine operation. And they have no idea what it takes to get a mining company to sign a deal and sell the value. An IT developer likely has never torn apart a 100-ton engine and has no idea what parts are most important to replace. They do not have that intuition. A data analyst won't intricately understand the marine energy business, the sector, what parties and policies and the government are involved, how all of it works together. So they don't know how to produce results that can actually meaningfully be inserted into workflows to have their value realized. So back to my story, the data scientists assumed that the business was asking for insights that were relevant and actionable. They gave them the benefit of the doubt that they were asking for things that if I had this, I could do this. They assumed the sales leaders just needed to know these customer predictions and could turn it into money. So the more specialized the industry and application and products, the less intuitive it is for those in analytics and data science and software. So intuition matters. It also matters because the business doesn't feel that the data people carry any credibility. And why should they? They don't understand their problems. They've never sat at the other end of the table in that deal. So why did the business in my story come to them with a solution in mind? They thought they had to. They're like, I can't come to the data people with my need and troubleshoot. What are they going to offer me? So let me think through how I would solve this with some fancy stuff that I'm assuming I fully understand and request a solution. So I'll hire these smart people, or I'll buy into an off-the-shelf product from a startup and I'll make it work for me. But that's an incorrect assumption. So as data experts, the business, just like the data experts, the business has its limitations. So if I'm a career business professional in traditional sector, I'm likely unaware of all the possibilities when it comes to integrating analytics meaningfully into my business workflow. I can't even ask because I don't know what's possible. So more data is not what the leaders in this story needed. That's not what they needed. So when you get more data that you don't know how to work with, you just assume problems are too complex. They didn't realize that if they had gone to them originally and built a holistic solution, they wouldn't have ended up with an insight that was just another buzzword. So I would like to focus on the opportunity in B2B that is what this new world looks like. It's a world where the sales leadership, where business has a relationship of trust with the data experts. There's a foundation of, I don't understand, but I respect that you're coming to the table with something I don't know. They come to the data team and they say, look, I'm going to put some hope out here. I'm going to give up a bit of control and I'm going to say, I want to look at ways that we can use data to better recommend coverage, back to my example. Let's see what we can build together. So this future, it takes a lot of collaboration and it takes a lot of compassion. And I think that that's something that is foundationally overlooked when we're looking at finding the right people, when we're looking at building collective teams, when we're looking at why aren't our data teams offering the value. I think that's something to consider. And it's not always found particularly in the data practitioners themselves. So I think an opportunity is for people like myself in situations where you don't have inherently that intersect. You need to find people that have enough of a technical skill set to be able to relate to the data people, understand what's possible, but can also speak the business, have been in those situations, have actually shadowed or done those jobs themselves, so they understand what it takes to actually realize value, not just deliver a product. What is the actual end value so they can have credibility with both sides? So there's a tremendous opportunity to foster that talent as well as find those right people and really bridge the gap there. Because I think that B2B, we understand, even traditional sector, we know we need data, but there's that massive gap because it's just, it's not working.
Oh, there's so many good points there. I would love to dig into a bunch of those areas. It's interesting though that you kind of finished on the note of you got to find the right people. So to bridge that gap. So if you look at our logo, the right brain and the left brain, the creative mind and logical mind, when they come together in a meaningful way, that's where the insights come up. Yeah. So even if you think about it neurologically, the tissue that connects the two hemispheres, I think the corpus callosum, when it works properly, that's when you have high performing mind. In that case, you said that you got to find these right people. So just a quick question before I explore that story, which was, by the way, amazing because it gives us so much to talk about. When you look for people, how do you make sure that they have this kind of sync in terms of their technical skills and their business savvy or their potential to communicate well? And are you willing to consider sometimes, okay, I see potential in this person, now I'm going to train them instead? So just a few words around that before we kind of circle back to the story.
Is this particularly for the talent, like the people on the teams or the leaders?
It would be actually for your team, particularly, because that's what you meant, right? You actually need to find the right people for your team. And I remember actually at CDAO, I think we talked about this topic specifically, and you had some great insights. So maybe if you can just say a few words around that would be great.
Absolutely. So when it comes to fostering between those gaps, you can't have people that are good at everything. So I think that it's really important to find leaders that are comfortable with nuance. So when I'm approaching with my team, each person is unique. And what I mean by that is, if a particular person has the natural affinity to be a very good communicator, then I think there's tremendous opportunity to give them a lot of exposure in stakeholder relations, amazing question asking, negotiation training, understanding how to use your words to unsurface problems. Because there's a bunch of stuff going behind the table with the people that's going on. If you don't ask the right questions, you're building the wrong thing. However, that takes time. That takes time that you're not learning technical skill sets. There's also amazing technical people that really have no interest in that piece. So depending on the size of your team, if you have a very, very small team, you probably need a lot of jack of all trades, in which case you got to be careful that there's a balance. You do need enough technical, but I would say if you have a large enough team, it's really important to allow people the opportunity, just with talent demands nowadays, that people want to feel valued and they want to feel like they have their own career trajectory at a company. So I take it case by case. What are you really trying to foster? Where are your natural abilities? And let's push you as far in those areas as what makes sense. But I mean, if you are a technical, if you are a data scientist or a data engineer, your first and foremost contribution needs to be technical. Versus an analyst, depending on the type of analyst that I have, some of my analysts are fairly, you could potentially say fairly non-technical, because their expertise is business acumen. They intimately understand that other side of the equation I was explaining. They have been in that room when the person signed the deal. that's an invaluable resource because stakeholders are sometimes hard to get a hold of. So to have a person on your team that can speak firsthand to that experience is worth its weight in gold.
Yeah, invaluable, absolutely, because what we've been seeing is that companies invest huge amounts of resources and money into hiring these super smart people with doctorates and an IQ of 160, and they can build amazing stuff. And, like a data scientist, it just costs so much money. And then it's the salary, but also the opportunity cost, the technology that they're using. And what we've been seeing is that a lot of times companies just can't really fulfill their potential in data analytics because these people who build these amazing things, they can't really meaningfully interact with the business and ask the right questions. So this ties us back into that story, which I loved, by the way. So where did it all go wrong in that story? How do you think that would have been executed better? So if you can, let's say, hypothetically, go back into a situation like this, what would you fix so that to make sure that when that sales team gets those insights, they actually deliver amazing value?
Okay. If it's all right, I'm going to take what should have gone right in that story right back to the very, very beginning of the story. Yeah. So in either case, let's say in that case, the team doesn't have a leader that is an expert communicator, that is the innovation leader. In those cases, if your company represents that's your team, you don't have that person, that translation layer, you better make sure your team is fairly capable of asking these questions on their own. If they're not, that's okay. Sometimes it's okay to hire the PhD that's a brilliant doer. They want to put their head down and go to work. That's wonderful. We need those people. You better have somebody who is protecting them as the linebacker on that team. You need to have the linebacker in those cases that's doing the translation. And I wouldn't encourage that person to be interacting directly with the business. So back to how could that situation have gone right? So there's three main areas that I really, really pushed my team, and I spent a lot of time educating in the business when it comes to how to foster stakeholder collaboration and engagement. First, user understanding. Second, involvement at ideation. And third, testing and fast iterative design. So I'll go through these each a little bit individually. So first, user understanding is everything. At that very first stage, the business comes, team, I need you to build a model to do this. No work should have started. Absolutely none. That should have been a full, you gave me a piece of information, and now I know to start digging into a particular process. Absolutely nothing starts to get built. So user understanding is what gives you credibility and ensures you develop solutions versus products. So when you first get a request, your team should have the process to take the time to thoroughly understand the current process, map your user flow, highlight where all the decisions are made. Even if the business says that's not necessary, it is. It is necessary, or your time, don't even get involved. I oftentimes do say no in situations where there isn't the time to do this. Well, then I'm definitely not going to make something of value for you. So we're going to move past this opportunity. So these things take time. Also in the user understanding stage, perspective. So this doesn't mean talking to one person or talking to two people. It means talking not only to the people making the request, but all the stakeholders that are involved, or at least a representation of at least one person in each of the stakeholder groups. So back to my story, the data teams did not do this. They didn't try to understand what decisions were made and how this flows. So not all the stakeholder conversations you have at this stage are going to influence the exact solution requirements, but they all provide useful insights into how a given solution will be interpreted. This is how you identify your deal breakers across the table. Where maybe the leaders are fully on board, middle management's fully on board, the users, this will never work with them, with how they function. If you don't ask the questions, you're building the whole process up to fail. So this is also a critical change management piece, right? That you need to get those perspectives. It's also a great opportunity for data education. It's another reason why I encourage this stage. So when you're talking to your stakeholders at the beginning, that's a great opportunity to talk about what data do we have and what data would be nice to have, as well as it's a data fluency education opportunity. What's possible in technology today? You see now how we're not even necessarily talking about building a product. Now we're talking about bring me into your world. Let's talk about what's going on here. These conversations also will give you exposure, whether it's the leader participating in these, or if you have smaller teams, the actual analysts and data scientists themselves. It gives them an idea for what language does my business use. So instead of building a solution where all the recommendations are, and we've all seen examples of this, they're not in terminology or phrasing that mean anything to the people who have to use it. So it's an opportunity to get opinions, to understand how people think, to get higher business credibility, because you're going to start to use the right terms. After the fourth person you talk to, you're now referencing the previous peers you talked to. Now everyone feels like, oh, I want to be a part of this. I want to be engaging. Oh, you talked to this person. What was their opinion on this? Now you're fostering collaboration indirectly, just because people want to be a part of something like that. It helps people feel heard, it helps them feel more invested. I cannot stress the importance enough of understanding the users at the beginning, and that did not take place. It also helps you set, I have to say this piece, it also helps you set realistic expectations. The road to building meaningful data science and analytics solutions is bumpy. We all know it's bumpy. If you don't set realistic expectations for like, hold on, there's going to be turbulence, but we will get to a destination, people are going to be thoroughly disappointed, or potentially might even question if you know what you're doing. So that's just a gap in you just didn't set realistic expectations. Second, in the story, involvement and ideation. So, and this is something that is really hard to put into practice, and I will recognize that for everyone listening and for myself. It's really difficult to, when someone involves you right at ideation, oftentimes, right, that means that they haven't come up with a solution. It very rarely works that way. So usually you're approached with a solution. What I would strongly recommend, even outside of the user understanding, don't ever take the first design. Don't ever assume that the business knows what it needs or that you know what the business needs. So just like back in my story, it's critical that you have like it's critical to have a meaningful analytics and data science solution to help the business early, like to think about that early, right at ideation. So you have to reach out, have these brainstorming sessions, talk about what's possible, find your early adopters and have these big brainstorming sessions. And I usually try to also have some people from IT on the call because they're usually aware of the current infrastructure and architecture of how the applications, the rest of the stuff work together. So you're not planning for things that maybe aren't possible or would require tremendous rework. So need, not solution. That's what involving your data team at ideation allows you to do. It is so important that they're right there at the beginning because then you can come up with really creative solutions. You can't ask for what you don't know is possible, right back to the original story. So if they had reached out to the data team and said, I'm trying to do coverage, we need to figure out a way to essentially evaluate at the end of the day, right? What does that really mean? Does this customer assigned to this rep make sense? That's essentially what you are asking. So now you have framed with the data team, instead of coming up with models for data labels, which might be part of the process, you're like, okay, my goal, I have not done anything until I have something that can get to that. Even if it's simple at the beginning, which brings me to my last piece, user testing and fast iterative design. So in the beginning, what we really try to do on my team is not jump right into building a solution or building a requirements to build out a solution. We try to originally come up with the most rudimentary, the most basic MVPs and prototypes. You can use Figma, you can use Excel, you can even use Power BI. But if you have not originally created a really simple template and put it in front of a human being to look at it and play with it and play with the interactions, you are making so many assumptions along the way and something is going to fall flat. Tech masters this, right? Tech has figured this out because tech goes right to see. They do A/B testing. They don't do anything until they've done a million different iterations, a million different tests across user groups, and they know exactly the size of the button, what color this needs to be. I find in B2B, from my experience, this is not done at all. Right? We're like, oh, the business needs this. This is the fastest way to make it. It looks like this. The users will figure it out, force them to use it. Well, our expectations as people is now being set by the B2C market. That's what we do. We have an Amazon experience, and then you go to your B2B experience, and it's foundationally different. And so you're dealing with people that do have an idea for what a good user experience is. So if we're wondering why our B2B tools and solutions aren't working for them, question the usability of your tool. And the first step to get to a usable function, like a coverage recommendation model, how many iterations did you develop? How many different versions did you develop? And how do you know for sure that this is the one that gets your message across easiest and fastest? Or did you just jump to the fastest iteration possible? So all of these things were missed in my story.
Very interesting. So you mentioned B2B multiple times. So let me just tell you that we work with some of the biggest brands in the world, and without naming names, you would be surprised how like very, very few organizations from some of the like hottest and sexiest names still struggle with this. Of course you have the Amazons of the world, of course you have the Netflixes of the world, but those are digitally native companies. Some of them are built on data. Like actually Netflix, again at CDAO, there was this presentation. It started with who thinks that Netflix is a streaming company, and a lot of people think it's a streaming company. Well, it's a data company. So when you have like a B2C brand that you would really expect a high level of data maturity from, most of the time, I tell you, it's kind of like insider information, that is just not the case. These same challenges pop up all the time, that lack of meaningful connection with the business. It's really hard to execute on a large scale, especially when you have these solidified, entrenched habits of mind and behavior, right? So also, do you see this personally? Just a question from the top of my head. Do you see this lack of business connection as mainly a cultural issue? And do you see yourself as a change agent in that as a data professional?
Yeah, I think foundationally there's this there's this idea that you can take data and put trends on it and make it pretty and put it back to people. And people are supposed to be like, thank you. This is nice. This is wonderful. What do I do with it? And I think that there's this idea that because we can do so much more with data now, that we're past that. It's like, well, we're past that. We're past giving people spreadsheets and aggregated data. But I would question, is a bunch of line graphs, a bar chart, and like top 3 of X, this is going down by this %, is that any better? Does that get me maybe a little bit better, for sure. It's better. But it doesn't actually get me to the destination. The destination is a decision. So I'll give a really basic example here that I see a lot, and it's partial to my industry, but I think people can relate all around. Take any example where you have like telematics and sensors on products. So this is very prevalent in my world. So our construction, our mining equipment, our material handling equipment, they all have sensor telematics data that provide us information about the health. It's pretty much like getting like blood work, right? Like we have all of these stats about the health of our assets. So the biggest trend I have seen in this industry, giving back to customers the value of their data, here's trends about your data. Here you go. Here are all the alerts that happened. Here's the hours on it. Here's how often it's running. Here's the weird stuff. Oh, here's dangerous alerts. Here's some of the more advanced stuff might even go as far to say, we think that this part will last maybe this long. And you're like, oh, now we're really getting somewhere. But I'm gonna bring it back to something that's like really rudimentary here. This comes from my civil background. So I'm a fleet manager. I only have a certain number of meaningful decisions that I can actually make. What are those decisions? I can buy, rent, or sell my machines. I can adjust my maintenance strategy, which is literally like, oh, I do this at this time, so I can adjust what that looks like. Or I can tell off an operator because they're doing unsafe stuff. And the last thing is I can change a part or like change or repair something because I think it's going to fail. Okay, so those are the things that I can do. What does that have to do with this dashboard you just gave me? How is that in my world? My world is the life cycle profitability of my fleet, my operational costs. What does that have to do with my world? So oftentimes we think we're delivering value because it's better than just getting raw data, but we're not bringing it over the finish line. And I think it's a tremendous disservice to think that that is insight, because it's not. You are now giving the onus back on the people who are not the data experts to get over the finish line. And quite frankly, I think that's the hardest part. And that's where we need to be spending our time. I think we're past the point that a bar chart is meaningful. If you're showing me a bar chart, it's my team knows this. I don't want to see it.
No, I really like your firm grip on the issue, and I also love that you kind of have a framework of how can you overcome this by speaking the business language and then setting realistic expectations. The whole idea of ideation and co-creation in a way with your users, and then also user testing like constantly. It's a very innovative mindset and a framework that I love. That maybe someday, unfortunately, I don't think that we will have the scope in this conversation to dive deeper, but maybe later on in a different setting we will be able to do that. But I really like it, and it really focuses on how to create that meaningful connection with the business, with the right focus on your users who will actually be using your solutions. Now, a question popped up in my mind. So when you're interacting with the business and you try to achieve that, I mean, you should be well received. So the whole idea of being the person that people like to talk to, that people welcome and embrace, how do you do that? What do you think is the ideal data transformation leader? What kind of qualities, what kind of virtues does that person embody to be a pleasant and useful presence in the business?
Yes. Oh, I love this question so much because it's existential for me. I spend so much time thinking about this. I think in this space, it's new. We're trying to figure it out. And I know this is maybe an old adage, but it stands really, really true. It's important to find people who want to get it right, not to be right. That is so, so, so important. The space is constantly evolving. Things that you're right a year ago, you're wrong today. So find passionate and smart people, of course, but have an attitude for curiosity, humility, and compassion. There's no such thing as being too humble in this space. I think there's a bit of a misconception that humility or compassion or asking a lot of questions, questioning the way that we approach things, loses our credibility back to the business, right? Because we're dealing with a lot of people that maybe don't understand what we do already. And we're like, we're not just spreadsheet pushers, and we're trying to push a certain persona, but none of that really matters. If you come with an air of like compassion and humility, it's going to really serve you in the long run. So I feel transformation leaders need to have communication mastery. So they need to be experts in communication, how to listen, when to speak, how to influence, what's really being said here. They need to be able to derive everyone's expectations, including their own team. They need to be able to identify root problems, which between us, usually emotional, 9 times out of 10. They need to figure out what the biases are, what the resistance, the insecurities. So there's so much empathy here. And I feel that you really need to be able to say no, turn down a lot of ideas, but somehow still inspire hope and motivate change. And again, I think that's empathy. I don't know how you do any of that, how you say no to people and still keep them on your team. I don't mean literally employed on your team. I mean in your boat, right? Motivated to what you're trying to accomplish without a tremendous amount of empathy. So 3 questions I've been trying to think. I do a lot of things in threes. 3 questions I try to think when even picking leaders. I have a couple of tremendous leaders on my own team. Can this person get to the root of the problem, or are they in it for the thrill of the build? This is the perfect example back to the story I said earlier. Are they in it to figure out what the real problem is to really surface out, even if it's not a glorified solution? Sometimes you dig into something, you think you're going to build this big fancy model, and it ends up being, oh, actually the best thing here is to just add an extra column on this table. Like that's when they they see data most often. And it's kind of like a letdown, but that's where you're helping people the most. So is the person in it for the thrill of the build, to build something fancy, or do they actually really care about that? Can the person ask the right questions and make people feel heard? Or does it sound pre-rehearsed? Do they sound like they're really just trying to get to their own rhetoric? Do they sound like they already know what they're going to say before you even had your rebuttal? And lastly, is the person credible? This goes without saying. Credible enough in both business and credible enough in both tech. It's unfortunate that you do have to kind of have mastery in both, but you do. Otherwise, I'm not sure how you would be able to serve as a true innovation leader in the space, because you really need to be able to hold your own in both groups.
Absolutely. And it's so good that when you listed these, so curiosity, humility, and compassion, and you repeated the word compassion a few times, and actually like caught my ear of, okay, compassion. Usually when we talk about this, is we frame it as empathy. I don't know if it was conscious on your end or not, but I like compassion because compassion actually focuses on pain. So you can be empathetic with someone, right? Yeah. I just want to understand your perspective. When you're compassionate, then the pain just becomes a little bit more relevant. Like I actually try to understand what pains you. So that pops up an interesting question, that what we're talking about here, and communication, and also you're trying to like advance this data-driven agenda in the company. You want people to buy into it. You want to influence their decision-making. So this is about the psychology of human decision-making, and is driven by pain and pleasure. So just an interesting question for you, that with your experience, when you try to build the right solutions for the right people at the right time that they will actually use, do you like to focus more on pain or pleasure? Is it more about the carrot or the stick? Like which one?
I try to lead with carrot and end with stick. That's a general, long story short of it. I really do try to lead with hope, with the positive mantras, recognizing what you're going through, but talking about, oh man, like you'll be able to get rid of all these parts of your job you don't like and lead towards all of this, but there's always going to be the bathtub curve of adoption, right? You always have your early adopters, kind of your majority middle, and those late. And oftentimes, unfortunately, the late adopters, you really do need to have some kind of stick mandate. There have been a number of times where we've had to, change policies or incorporate things into people's compensation, whatever have you, just to really kind of push the late adopters, which usually, we're doing our job, end up seeing the value. They end up getting there eventually, but sometimes the stick is necessary. I do try to lead with the carrot. Oh, I think the carrot in general, just like dog training, right? Positive reinforcement generally works better if you can pull it off.
Oh yeah, you're an insider on dog training as well. No, that's such a good point, and it's an interesting question. I didn't think about it before the conversation, but yeah, that duality of the carrot and the stick, and the pain and the pleasure, I think also how it's being conceptualized. That now we're referring to our business as well. If you conceptualize it as the heaven and hell vision, because that's like the space that people inhabit in a way. So it's like, what is your worst nightmare? Right? What is the thing that frustrates you the most? And what happens if that continues? And on the other hand, what if that's solved and you kind of reach that promised land? And that's a very, very powerful combination. That you can really move people with this.
Well, there's an intersect there too, right? There's an opportunity to not have to go all the way to hell and be able to say, well, you might miss out on X if you don't. So you're not necessarily encouraging the carrot, but you're dangling like a bit of FOMO strategy in front of people. And I'll usually try to kind of refer to that way before especially with like late adopters or really big resistors in a change management strategy. Sometimes those are key stakeholders. What I find really works well is when you find few good success stories, or some people with credibility in the business that have picked up the carrot, they've eaten the carrot, they're all in. You can usually spell the theory of, well, look at all the benefits that this person eating the carrots is enjoying. You can either miss out on that, and if they hang out long enough and they're really, really resistant, it's like, okay, well, there's also a stick coming, but I mean, I get on the carrot early if I were you. Like, there's an in-between stage to kind of play that card, but again, it's communication. It's all about nuance. If you play that card wrong, people can call your bluff pretty quick. So you better make sure that you're only playing those cards and you really need to.
Absolutely. And I like how you started with the story, and what we're talking about now is storytelling. How do you tell that story to that person to change their perspective, change what they see and what they do at the end of the day? And I always like to bring the Trinitarian structure of storytelling. You said that you like to think in threes, which just seems to be like wired into us. I like to think about storytelling in the same way, because when you tell a story, you basically, a good story is more like building a fire. You cannot really like force it to happen. You need to create the right conditions, and that fire emerges, right? So in the case of fire, it happens to be three things. It's the flammable object, heat, and oxygen. Those three things, when they co-align, when they coexist, the fire just is. So storytelling is the same, because when you focus on the three key elements, which is the storyteller, and we talked about how to embody the right qualities so that the story is well received. It's important where the story is being told from, like who is actually telling you the story changes how receptive you are. So you can treat that with the right qualities, virtues, habits of character, curiosity, humility, compassion, or empathy. So that's one. And then I think in the beginning, with your whole 4-point method to create the meaningful connection with the business, speaking their language and co-creation and all that stuff, that's actually treating the subject of who receives the story, right? Like who's actually taking on the story. So that's the second piece. And then the third piece is the story shared between the storyteller and the audience and the receiver. So that kind of leads me to another question that is connected.
Metaphor, by the way.
Yeah, thank you very much.
I really enjoyed that.
Thank you very much. Yeah, we spent quite a lot of time in this space, so it's just kind of, again, organically emerged, this insight. I didn't do anything. I can't take credit for it. And so storytelling in that sense. So have you thought about storytelling in an intentional way as a data analytics leader, as something that needs to be cultivated? Is it something that you use consciously during your work to connect with people? Do you have maybe any best practices on storytelling? Like, what are your general impressions of how important this is, and what kind of emphasis should the leaders of the future put on this particular idea and theme of storytelling?
Storytelling is everything. We are human beings. We are inherently driven by stories. It's the reason why we remember songs that have narratives written into them, and why we care to watch movies and TV shows is because they tell us stories. So this is a massive thing that I emphasize on my team. We do part of our onboarding with my group is a data. I host a data storytelling. Here are expectations. Here are examples of how to do it, examples of how to create that climax, that tension. Sometimes you don't always have a business case where there were stakeholders actually creating tensions or differences of opinion. It could even be as simple as having your audience guess what the result is going to be, but you need to make it entertaining. So what I talk about a lot is it's not about us as data people, right? That gets forgotten a lot because there's a lot of schooling. We spend a lot of money doing this, but to work in the data space is to work in the servitude of others that struggle to understand a language they don't speak. And that language is data. So be a teacher, not a magician. No one wants stuff to magically appear. They want to understand, they want to be brought into the story. So one of the ways that we create that kind of accountability in my team is the expectation is if you are presenting data, and I mean in any case, not just to a stakeholder, to myself, to anyone else on the team, data storytelling is not optional. If you're presenting the data, you better make it a story, or I don't want to hear it, because that means to me, you do not foundationally understand the story of your data. If you can't tell me the story, you don't know the story. So I want you to tell me a tale. Do not pull up data, do not pull up a graph until that gets to the climax of your story. Paint me the image. Why are we here? Who are the players? Is there a conflict? Is there love? Is there hate? Why am I involved in this? There's so many times where, a project gets passed on and you're sitting in front of an audience, right? So we're sitting in, let's be an audience for a minute. And somebody comes on and they throw up coverage results. So like, here was our coverage last year. Here's our coverage next year. Here's the net difference. Everyone's like, okay, that's great for everyone involved. But what if the presenter came up and told the saga of, we thought we've been doing this for 30 years, the exact way that it needed to be done. And we partnered with this data team over here. And we're like, what are these jokers going to be able to pull off? So we worked together. We tried this and it didn't work. And we tried that and it didn't work. And all hope was lost. And yet something emerged. And they tell a whole story. Not only are people going to remember what was said, but they probably are going to treat you with a whole lot more credibility for understanding everything that's going on. Anybody can get up and present about the before and after of a result. And I think what happens when you do that is people think that foundationally, maybe you don't care, or that you've forgotten that there's real human beings that this story represents. So foundationally coming from a place of data storytelling shows that compassion that you referred to earlier. It shows that I care about the result here. And I know at the end of the day, human beings are involved. And it just brings back the human element that really brings us all together. So it's an absolute must on my team. It's something that's the very first thing that we do. We even have like lunch and learns that we do quite often, where I'll pick a project for each of the team members and I'll have them do elevator pitches and tell us stories. And then I'll pretend to be the stakeholder that I asked them to tell the story to. And I'll critique the story. I'll say parts that didn't relate to me. Why did you bring up that part? Just to emphasize, do you know the pain points? Because your story should have my pain points in it. The pain points you talked about weren't relevant to me. Do you know what I'm driven by? What do I care about? What are the personality of the kind of people's in this role? If you're talking to salespeople, are you being animated? Are you being excited? Are you engaging to a salesperson? If you're talking to somebody who's more reserved and more data driven, are you giving them comfort and reassurance in your story that you have done all due diligence and maybe related to the fact like, whew, I was nervous because, these things can be, you're relating on something very human and the person's like, I see myself in the person that's talking. I understand what's going on here. And now you're connecting on something way bigger than data. And that's where I feel you really, really get engagement and collaboration when you connect beyond what the data is.
Well, I love your passion about humanizing analytics, and I also like how you kind of just raise the stakes of, okay, you got to use the stories, you got to use a tale. No, you know what? It's a saga, actually, like really epic, and you're really hitting the spot because that's what actually inspires people. What you want is to spark their imagination, because also like nowadays, especially this was always the case, but it is the case increasingly so that the human attention span has its own very severe limitations, and it's getting worse and worse and worse. And to really earn that spot on someone's schedule, to someone to take notice and actually change what they do, well, you got to earn it, and you can earn it by applying good storytelling. So again, so I knew that this would happen. Yeah, go ahead.
Can I just comment one thing on that? That's
Please.
Something that I thought at the CBAO you highlighted, and I thought that was really cool. I don't know if you remember saying this, but you said something along the lines of, we don't want to make the assumptions that people care. I'm paraphrasing. You said something along the lines, and I remember I'm like, oh, I definitely connect with this person. I completely relate. Like, I think a lot of times as data people, right, that's our whole world. And so we present stuff and we're like, of course you care. You asked for this. That's not their world. Their world's something else. They asked you for something, and it probably left their head as soon as they went off. And it's like, so you need to make people care again, even if it's the person who asked you for help. Don't assume people care. Just generally assume people don't care and aren't paying attention, and you'll probably be served very well.
It's so true. And again, it ties back to humility, right? Because when you have that humility, because like the flip side of humility is arrogance or pride, right? Now, people should listen because I have the shiny tool and I'm an expert in my domain. So come on, like worship my solution in a way. But then if you have that humility, then immediately there is that vacuum that you can feel with empathy. Okay, now I can just focus on the person, and with my humility, I would just end up creating that connection with that person. They will actually hear me, and my solution that on its own it's meaningless will find its home with the user through real adoption. So now I think that's a brilliant way also to kind of wrap up, because I knew that this will happen, but you came up against the hour. So I knew going into this conversation that there will be so many things to talk about, and we will only be able to focus on a few things. But we have to land the plane with basically the finishing remarks. What would be your recommendation, your personal advice for the data leaders and data storytellers of the future really want to take advantage of the decade of data that's upon us already? What would you recommend them focus on and prioritize to really be successful?
I would say take on as many different types of projects as possible. Variety is going to lend you tremendous insights for how to approach problems. You would be stunned at how similar all problems really are at the end of it, but you can only really get that insight from trying everything. Don't be afraid of failure. You're going to fail, and you're going to fail a lot. It's just par for the course. Welcome, welcome. We have t-shirts. Also, I would say, if you're going to be playing with the data set, if you're going to be experimenting or taking a boot camp, dig all the way into it. If they give you a data set, let me give you an example. If they give you a data set on toy sales, research the toy industry. Research how the toy industry works. Even if it has nothing to do with what the actual question is being provided, it's important. It's important because you will start to understand the context of what questions to ask, because you'll understand what this data more represents. So just Google, find out more about how stuff works together, because the data itself is only one piece. So I think when you're first learning, there's this assumption that people will tell you what you need to know, but they won't. So the more experience you have learning about different industries, how companies make money, what are the government implications when things work together? What are the main pain points and the main goals for any organization or industries at large? You'll get a far better understanding for what questions to ask and what possibilities a certain data set you have can accomplish.
Well, that's amazing advice. And Sarah, this was a lot of fun. I hope that we can benefit from your experience and perspective moving forward as well. I mean, you'll be joining our masterclass, and I'm sure that we will find ways to collaborate. And this was fantastic. And thank you very much for coming on the show.
Thank you so much. It was so much fun, Laszlo. Thank you for having me.
Our pleasure.